You wouldn't believe the day I found my tomatoes wilted, my sunflowers drooping, and the unmistakable stench of poison lingering in my garden soil. Living next door to an HOA Karen is like walking on thin ice. You never know when she'll strike next. But when I discovered she'd been sneaking around my yard with weed killer, I decided I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I've always believed a man's yard says something about his character. For me, my garden wasn't just a patch of soil, it was my sanctuary. I spent hours each week nurturing it. From the bright yellow sunflowers that towered like sentinels along the fence to the thick tomato vines heavy with fruit. Every morning, I'd step outside with a cup of coffee, breathing in the fresh scent of damp soil and sweet blossoms. It was my piece of peace. That's why the sight that greeted me one Tuesday morning hit like a gut punch. My sunflowers, once proud and tall, drooped as if someone had taken the life right out of them. The leaves were curling and spotted with strange brown burns. My tomatoes, which had been bright and firm just the day before, looked like they'd been shriveled in an oven. The air smelled faintly chemical, like something sharp had been spilled across the dirt. I knelt down, running my fingers over the dry, lifeless stems. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I spent an hour checking the irrigation system, thinking maybe the hose had leaked or I'd accidentally over-fertilized. But deep down, I knew better. I could almost feel her eyes on me. Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen. She was the kind of woman who treated the HOA like her personal army. Every lawn, every mailbox, every trash can placement had to meet her approval, or else. I'd caught her peering over my fence more times than I could count, muttering about yard standards and how my garden looked like a wild mess. But I'd brushed it off. After all, what kind of person takes their hatred of flowers this far? I didn't have to wait long for a clue. As I walked the property line, I noticed faint footprints in the soft dirt by the back fence, too small to be mine, too fresh to be from last night's rain. The grass along that fence line was dead in a perfect streak, as though someone had sprayed something toxic right under the panels. I picked up a broken plastic nozzle lying nearby, coated with a sticky residue that reeked of weed killer. My stomach turned. She did this. HOA Karen poisoned my garden. Anger burned through me hotter than the July sun. That garden wasn't just a hobby, it was my pride, my hard work, my therapy after long days. And she'd ruined it because it didn't look like her precious manicured hedges and lifeless stone paths. I stormed into my garage, my hands trembling as I threw the nozzle into the trash. I could almost see her smug face, leaning back in her Adirondack chair, thinking she'd fix the neighborhood by destroying what I'd built. I spent the rest of the day trying to salvage what I could. I pruned, watered, and tried to flush the soil, but the poison had seeped deep. By nightfall, I'd lost half the plants I'd cared for all summer. I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries. Karen had crossed a line, and I knew I couldn't let this slide. The next morning, I saw her walking her dog past my house. She didn't even glance at me, just a smug little smirk, as if she already knew she'd won. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to spray her yard back. I was going to outsmart her, hit her where it hurt, and make sure she understood that I wasn't someone to be messed with. But before I could get to the revenge part, I needed proof. I spent that week setting up cameras along the fence line. Late one night, my plan paid off. There she was, in her pink sweatshirt, creeping along the fence with a spray bottle in hand, her flashlight cutting across my yard like a thief in the dark. I watched her on the screen, and I felt my blood run hot. It was time to confront her. I didn't wait long after seeing that footage. The very next morning, I marched over to Karen's pristine yard, my phone in hand with the video ready to play. Her property was as fake and lifeless as her attitude. Perfectly trimmed hedges, plastic lawn ornaments, and not a speck of dirt out of place. She was kneeling by her driveway, polishing her garden gnome like it was a prized trophy. "Karen," I said, my voice steady but sharp, "we need to talk." She barely looked up. If this is about your weeds, I already told the HOA I cut her off by holding the phone in front of her. Watch. The video rolled, showing her sneaking around with the spray bottle. Her smug grin vanished, replaced by a flash of panic she tried to cover with a scowl. That's not me. That's someone else. Really? I tilted the screen. Pink sweatshirt, same haircut, same nosy attitude. Looks like you to me. She stood, brushing off her knees, and crossed her arms. Your yard is a mess. It's bringing down property values. I was doing you a favor. A favor. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Poisoning my garden isn't a favor. It's vandalism. You've crossed the line. Karen. She smirked. The kind of smirk that makes you want to tear down a fence with your bare hands. Good luck proving anything to the HOA. They listened to me, not you. Her confidence wasn't surprising. She practically ran the HOA board. She was the kind of person who knew how to twist rules and push buttons until everyone bent to her will. I realized right then that confronting her wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan that would make her pay, not just in fines or apologies, but in the one thing she cared about most: control. Still, I wasn't going to let her walk away without feeling some heat. I've got this video, I said, pocketing my phone. You so much as set one foot on my property again, and I'll take this to the police. Poisoning plants. That's property damage. Think about how the HOA will feel when they see their queen bee dragged into a legal mess. She stiffened at that, though her smile didn't waver. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I turned on my heel and walked back to my yard, my heart pounding with adrenaline. For a moment, I felt like I'd won something, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. She'd be plotting her next move before I even shut my door. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a letter from the HOA. A fine. Apparently, my unkempt garden violated the community's landscaping rules. I almost laughed at the audacity. She'd killed half my plants, and now I was being fined for it. I attended the next HOA meeting, hoping to clear things up. The room was full of my neighbors, half of them sipping coffee like it was some kind of Sunday brunch. Karen sat at the front like a queen on her throne, tapping a pen against her folder of violations. Mr. Turner, she said sweetly when my name came up. We've had multiple complaints about your garden. It's unsightly, overgrown, and doesn't meet our neighborhood standards. I stood up, my phone in hand again. Funny you say that, Karen, because here's a video of you sneaking into my yard with a bottle of poison. Maybe we should talk about how that violates the rules. A few gasps went through the room, but Karen was quick. This is harassment. He's making things up because he can't follow simple rules. Look at his yard. It's practically a jungle. I wanted to argue, but I could see she still had most of them wrapped around her finger. The HOA president, a tired-looking guy named Greg, shrugged and said, "Let's table this discussion and revisit the fine in 2 weeks. Mr. Turner, please bring evidence next time if you have any." Evidence. That word rattled around in my head on the walk home. I had video, sure, but I needed more than proof of her trespassing. I needed to beat her at her own game legally and creatively. That night, as I sat on my porch staring at the dead remnants of my once beautiful sunflowers, an idea started forming. Something bold, something Karen couldn't twist to her advantage. If she hated my yard so much, maybe I should give her something to really hate something she couldn't touch without looking like the villain she truly was. I decided I'd turn my yard into a fortress, not with walls or fences, but with living, breathing armor. Thorny vines, hardy, fast-growing plants that would climb and twist around the perimeter of my property, keeping her far away from anything I cared about. It wasn't just about protecting my garden anymore. It was about sending a message: you don't mess with me, and walk away unscathed. I should have known Karen wouldn't take my warning lightly. People like her don't quit, they double down. And sure enough, just a few days after the HOA meeting, I found a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door. It wasn't a friendly neighbor's note. It was another fine, this time for unapproved fencing and yard modifications. I stared at the paper, jaw tight, because I hadn't even started planting the thorny vines yet. Karen was moving faster than I'd expected, trying to box me in before I could strike back. She was clever, maliciously clever. She knew that bearing me under HOA fines would either force me to give up my garden or drain me into submission. But she didn't know me well enough. I don't fold when I'm cornered. That evening, I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, talking to two other board members, Bill and Martha. Both of them nodded along like they were being fed gospel truth. I could practically hear her voice from 20 feet away, whining about my jungle yard and how it attracted pests. My fists clenched at my sides. Evening, I called, stepping outside with a deliberate calmness. Karen turned, that ever-present smirk plastered on her face. "Oh, hi, Mr. Turner. We were just discussing how we can maintain our property values. You understand, don't you?" "I understand you're making up stories." I shot back. "Poisoning my plants wasn't enough. You have to drag the whole board into your nonsense." Bill cleared his throat awkwardly. Now, let's keep things civil. The HOA just wants everyone's yard to match community standards." I laughed loud enough to make them flinch. Community standards. My garden was thriving until someone I glanced right at Karen decided to kill it. "And now you're fining me for the damage she caused." Karen folded her arms. "You have no proof, Turner. You're just trying to stir up trouble. And if you keep this up, I'll file a complaint about harassment." Her tone was sugar-coated, but I could feel the venom underneath. She wasn't just trying to destroy my garden. She wanted to break me, to make me the neighborhood pariah. Fine. Two could play this game. Over the next few days, I did my homework. I dug into HOA bylaws, looking for every loophole I could find. I called the local garden center and even talked to a county horticulturalist about what plants were considered native landscaping and therefore untouchable by HOA rules. Turns out, thorny vines like wild roses and certain native brambles were not only legal, but also considered excellent for erosion control and wildlife support. Perfect. Meanwhile, the fines kept coming $50 here, $100 there. Karen wasn't letting up. At one point, I caught her taking photos of my yard from across the street. Her phone zoomed in like she was a paparazzo. I walked out to the curb, crossed my arms, and stared at her until she finally stomped away. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my garden. It was about power. Karen thrived on control. She used the HOA like a weapon, intimidating people until they gave her what she wanted. Well, I wasn't going to be intimidated. I was going to flip the script. I started documenting everything, every fine, every letter, every little smirk she threw my way. I also collected more footage from my cameras, which I'd now positioned in plain sight along the fence. If she even thought about stepping into my yard again, I'd have her dead to rights. The following week's HOA meeting was where things came to a boil. Karen wasted no time standing up, clipboard in hand. "The issue of Mr. Turner's yard is still ongoing," she began, looking around the room like a queen addressing her subjects. "He refuses to comply with our guidelines. And frankly, his property is an eyesore." I stood up slowly, holding my own folder of documents. An eyesore? Maybe we should take a look at this. I pulled up a printed photo of her sneaking around my fence with the spray bottle. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This is the same woman accusing me of neglect when she's the one trespassing and destroying property. Karen's face went pale, then red. "That photo proves nothing. You're just trying to make me look bad. You don't need my help for that," I said, my voice hard. "I've got video, timestamps, and a receipt for the chemicals you bought last month. Yes, I checked with the local store. You want to keep playing this game? We can take it to court." The room fell silent. Even Greg, the HOA president, shifted uncomfortably. Let's not escalate this further," he said. "We'll revisit these fines after reviewing the evidence." Karen shot me a glare that could have burned a hole through steel. I knew this wasn't the end, but I could feel the tide turning. For the first time, she didn't have all the power. That night, as I sat on my porch with a beer in hand, I started sketching the layout for my thorny vine plan. Karen wanted a war fine. I'd give her one, but it would be on my terms. Karen wanted to make me feel powerless, but that's where she miscalculated. I've spent my life solving problems, building solutions with my own two hands, and I wasn't about to let her HOA rulebook run me out of my own yard. After that HOA meeting, I spent hours sitting in my garage with a notepad, mapping out my next move. I wasn't just going to replace the flowers she'd poisoned, I was going to transform my yard into a fortress she couldn't stand to look at, let alone touch. The idea came to me while flipping through an old landscaping magazine. There was an article about using thorny vines and native plants to create living fences. These weren't just any plants, they grew fast, spread wide, and were nearly impossible to handle without gloves and heavy-duty cutters. Wild rose bushes, pyracantha, blackberry brambles, all of them had thick, sharp thorns that could stop a person in their tracks. Best of all, they were 100% legal and even considered environmentally friendly in our county. HOA couldn't say a thing about them. I decided to line my entire property with these thorny guardians. If Karen wanted to poke around my yard, she'd have to face a wall of nature's barbed wire. The next day, I took a trip to the local nursery. The owner, a grizzled old man named Hank, took one look at me and said, "You're not looking for petunias, are you?" I smirked. "Nope, I need something tougher, something that says keep out." He chuckled and led me to the back, where the wild rose bushes and thorny vines were stacked in black pots. "These babies grow fast," Hank said, patting one of the plants like it was a loyal dog. "Once they take root, they'll make sure nobody messes with your yard." I loaded up my truck with as many as I could fit, along with a few bags of rich soil and fertilizer. It wasn't cheap, but this wasn't about money anymore, it was about principle. That evening, under the warm glow of my porch light, I began the work. I dug deep trenches along the fence line, spacing out each plant carefully. The smell of fresh dirt mixed with the faint, lingering scent of the poison Karen had used, it fueled me, reminded me why I was doing this. As I planted the first row of wild roses, I imagined her face when she realized she couldn't just reach over and pull them up. I pictured her trying to lean on the fence to glare into my yard, only to catch her sweater on a thorn. The thought made me smile for the first time in days. By the third day, the line of vines was taking shape. I worked late into the evenings, my gloves thick and my arms scratched from the stubborn brambles. Sweat rolled down my back, but with every plant I placed, I felt stronger, more in control. This was my revenge, but it wasn't just petty. It was smart. It was lasting. I even added a few ornamental touches. In between the thorny bushes, I planted bright red and yellow flowers, resilient ones that would thrive despite the damage she'd caused. The contrast was beautiful, almost defiant, as if my garden was rising from the ashes of her sabotage. Of course, Karen noticed. On the fourth evening, as I was watering the new plants, I saw her peeking through the slats of the fence, her face twisted with confusion and annoyance. "What are you doing out there?" she called, her voice sharp. "Rebuilding," I replied calmly, not even looking up. "Don't worry, it's all legal. Native plants, approved by the county. HOA can't say a word." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but she didn't respond. She just stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. I knew then that I was getting under her skin, but this was just the beginning. Once the plants rooted and spread, they'd form a natural barrier so thick that even a determined trespasser couldn't get through without bleeding for it. I made sure to plant them right along the shared property lines, ensuring that every time Karen stepped outside, she'd see those thorny vines creeping closer, like nature itself was reclaiming the land from her tyranny. I took a photo of my progress and sent it to Greg, the HOA president, with a simple note: "All plants are native and HOA compliant. No further action needed." He replied within the hour, "Looks good, Turner. As long as it's within code, you're clear." That was all the confirmation I needed. By the end of the week, my yard was transformed into something both beautiful and untouchable. The vines, though young, already hinted at the thick, impenetrable wall they'd become. I stood at the edge of my driveway, wiping sweat from my brow, and for the first time since this mess began, I felt like I was winning. But I knew Karen. She wasn't going to let this go quietly. The moment she realized she couldn't control me or my yard, she'd strike back harder. And when she did, I'd be ready. Revenge isn't just about anger, it's about patience, planning, and precision. By the time I started the second phase of my plan, the thorny vines I'd planted along the fence were already sprouting new shoots. Each morning, I'd water them and watch their slow, stubborn climb, knowing every inch meant more trouble for Karen. But I wasn't done. I wanted a layer of defense so clever that even her conniving HOA mind wouldn't know how to fight it. The vines were my first strike, but my real trap would be a landscape so wild, yet so perfectly legal, that she'd have no way to argue against it. I spent hours researching plants that looked harmless but grew fast and aggressively. Native blackberry brambles, climbing roses, and pyracantha were all on my list. They didn't just have thorns, they had personalities. They spread like wildfire and created a natural barrier that even a rabbit would think twice about crossing. Every evening after work, I'd be out there digging and planting. I added a second row of thorny vines inside my yard, creating a double barrier. I made sure to mix in brightly colored wildflowers in between, partly to throw Karen off and partly to make my yard look vibrant and alive. If she wanted to complain to the HOA again, I'd have a wall of legal landscaping to shove in her face. I knew she was watching me every time I glanced up. I'd catch her curtain twitching. Once, I saw her standing by her kitchen window with binoculars, pretending to birdwatch. I smiled and waved. She slammed the blinds shut so fast it made me laugh. While most of my focus was on the backyard where she'd done the most damage, I wasn't about to leave my front yard unprotected. I replaced the poison flowers with native prairie grasses and low shrubs, each chosen for durability and ease of maintenance. Karen hated wild-looking plants, but the beauty of these grasses was that they were perfectly HOA approved. Every blade that sprouted was like raising a middle finger to her without saying a word. I also added a few solar lights to line the walkway. At night, the soft glow illuminated the freshly planted vines, giving them an almost intimidating presence. I imagined her seeing that glow from her front porch and grinding her teeth. The final touch was something Hank from the nursery suggested: a few climbing rose arches that I installed along the pathway to my backyard gate. "These things grow fast," Hank had said with a grin, "and when they bloom, they'll look beautiful. But until then, they'll snag anyone dumb enough to get too close." I spent a whole Saturday setting them up, sweating through my shirt as I dug and cemented the posts. By evening, the arches were in place, ready to grow into a living, thorny tunnel of beauty and pain. The first time Karen realized what I'd done, I was sitting on the porch sipping iced tea. She marched over to the fence, her face red and pinched, and yelled, "What on earth are you doing to this neighborhood? Those plants are hideous. They're native," I replied calmly, not even looking up from my glass. "County approved and HOA compliant. Want me to forward you the list?" Her jaw dropped like I'd just insulted her personally. "You can't. I can." I cut in, and I did. "So, if you're thinking about filing another complaint, I'd suggest you save yourself the trouble. Or better yet, stay off my property." She stormed off, muttering something about eyesores and lawyers. I just leaned back and enjoyed the view of my growing fortress. Over the next week, I made a point of checking my yard at night. I knew Karen was the kind of person who might try to fix things when no one was watching, but with my new security cameras and motion lights, she'd have to be a fool to try. One night, I caught her standing at the property line, flashlight in hand, staring at the vines like they were mocking her. When my motion light flicked on, she froze like a deer in headlights. "Evening, Karen," I called from the porch. "Need something." She scurried away without a word. By the end of that week, my trap was fully set. The vines were thriving, the arches were standing tall, and the wildflowers were blooming bright. My yard didn't just look alive again, it looked untouchable. I'd turned Karen's sabotage into the very thing that would drive her crazy every time she stepped outside. I took photos of every corner of the yard, sending them to Greg with a cheerful note just keeping the HOA updated on my beautiful, legal landscaping. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji, which made me laugh out loud. Karen might still have her precious rulebook, but I had something stronger: creativity, determination, and a yard full of thorns that would make sure she stayed on her side of the fence. It didn't take long for Karen to realize that my thorny fortress wasn't going anywhere. A few days after I finished planting, She came stomping across the street like she was on a mission. I was out front, hosing down my driveway, when she stopped at the edge of my yard and glared at the wall of vines now curling up and over the fence. "This is unacceptable," she barked, pointing at the roses and brambles like they'd personally insulted her. "You can't just turn your yard into a jungle." I calmly turned off the hose and looked her dead in the eye. "Karen, everything here is native, legal, and HOA compliant. In fact, Greg already signed off on it." She faltered for a moment, clearly not expecting me to have backup from the HOA president. "Well, it's a safety hazard," she said, scrambling for a new angle. "Someone could get scratched. A child could get hurt. Then maybe you should stay on your side of the fence," I replied coolly. Her face turned crimson. "This isn't over. Turner, I'll take this to the board. Do what you have to do," I said, leaning on the hose like I had all the time in the world. "Just remember, I have plenty of evidence of your little midnight garden visit. How do you think the board will react to that?" She huffed and stormed off, her little dog scurrying to keep up. But I knew that wasn't the end. Karen never walked away from a fight. She just regrouped. The next week, I started getting letters in my mailbox, anonymous concerns about my yard. One claimed that my plants were blocking the view from the street. Another said they were attracting snakes and vermin. It didn't take a genius to know who was behind them. Karen was trying to rally the neighbors against me. I decided to take control of the narrative. One evening, I invited a few of my friendlier neighbors over for a backyard barbecue. I wanted them to see for themselves that my yard wasn't some dangerous, overgrown mess. It was beautiful, vibrant, and carefully designed. As we sat around the grill, sipping cold beer and admiring the flowers blooming between the thorny vines, one of my neighbors, a retired firefighter named Dave, said, "This is gorgeous. Turner, looks like something out of a country magazine." Who's complaining about this? I didn't even need to answer. Everyone knew who. A few days later, I caught Karen in the act of trying to trim the vines from her side of the fence. She had a pair of garden shears and was hacking away like she was in a war zone. I stepped outside and leaned against the porch railing. "Careful there," I called out. "Those thorns will tear your hands up if you're not wearing proper gloves." She jumped, nearly dropping the shears. "Your plants are invading my property," she shouted. "Funny. Last I checked, that fence is on my property line. If they're growing through, maybe you should take better care of your side," she sputtered, unable to come up with a response. Finally, she slammed the shears down on her patio table and yelled, "I'm calling the HOA go-ahead," I said with a grin. "I'd love for them to see the footage of you trespassing again." The color drained from her face, and she stomped inside. Karen wasted no time calling an emergency HOA board meeting. I showed up prepared photos, videos, even a statement from Hank at the nursery confirming all my plants were county approved. The meeting was tense. Karen started by waving around photos of my yard, calling it hostile landscaping and a danger to the neighborhood. I let her rant for a while before standing up and calmly laying out my evidence. I showed the video of her trespassing, the receipts for my plants, and even a copy of the county's landscaping regulations. Greg, the HOA president, frowned as he reviewed the documents. "Karen," he said finally, "everything here checks out. Turner's plants are legal and within HOA guidelines. We can't issue fines for this." Karen's jaw dropped. But it's ugly. Its beauty is subjective," Greg interrupted. "Unless you can prove an actual violation, this is a personal dispute, not an HOA matter." I leaned back in my chair, watching Karen's face twist with frustration. For once, she didn't have the board eating out of her hand. After that meeting, Karen stopped talking to me altogether. She wouldn't wave when passing by, wouldn't even look my way. But I knew the silence wasn't peace, it was the calm before the next storm. In the meantime, I kept tending to my plants. The vines were growing thicker, the roses starting to bloom in deep reds and pinks. My yard looked better than ever, and every time I saw Karen glaring from her window, it felt like sweet victory. But I wasn't naive. I knew she'd come at me again, and when she did, I'd be ready. I knew the storm was coming. Karen's silence was never a sign of surrender. It was the quiet of someone sharpening their claws. 2 weeks after our last HOA meeting, I received a certified letter. It was a formal notice from the HOA board stating that there would be a special session to discuss ongoing landscaping disputes and potential neighborhood hazards. The letter might as well have had Karen's signature scrawled all over it. I spent that weekend preparing like I was going to trial. Every piece of evidence I'd collected photos of my thriving garden, timestamps of her trespassing, and even the county landscaping approval documents was neatly organized in a folder. I wasn't just defending my yard anymore. I was defending my right to live in peace without being harassed by someone who thought she ruled the block. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a place where folding chairs and stale coffee did little to soften the tension that always filled the air. By the time I arrived, the room was already buzzing. Neighbors were murmuring, some clearly on Karen's side, others just there for the drama. Karen was front and center, her hair perfectly coiffed, clutching a stack of papers like they were her winning lottery tickets. She gave me a smug glance as I walked in, like she'd already decided the outcome. Greg, the HOA president, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss complaints regarding Mr. Turner's landscaping. Karen, since you filed the initial grievance, you have the floor. Karen stood, clearing her throat theatrically. Thank you. Greg, I think we can all agree that our neighborhood thrives when we maintain certain standards, clean lawns, neat hedges, and a sense of uniformity. Unfortunately, Mr. Turner's yard has become a thorny nightmare, quite literally. It's not just unsightly, it's dangerous. Children could get hurt, pets could get tangled. This wall of thorns, she gestured dramatically, is an attack on our community's values. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see a few heads nodding, but others looked skeptical. I waited until she finished her performance before standing up. Greg, board members, neighbors, my yard is not a thorny nightmare. It's a native, eco-friendly landscape. Every plant I've put in is county approved and meets HOA guidelines. If Karen here wants to call it dangerous, maybe she should consider staying on her own property where it can't bother her. Karen's face twisted. You're being hostile. Turner, those plants are practically weapons. I pulled out my folder and calmly handed copies of my documentation to the board members. Here are the receipts for every plant I bought, along with confirmation from our local nursery that these are recommended for soil erosion and wildlife. Here's the county code that states native plants cannot be restricted by HOA landscaping rules. And I paused, pulling out my trump card. Here is a time-stamped video of Karen trespassing on my property with a bottle of weed killer. The room went dead silent. Greg raised an eyebrow as he watched the short clip on my phone. Karen, is this true? Karen's face turned crimson. That's not what it looks like. I was just trying to control the weeds that were spilling over the fence. On his side of the fence, I asked, my tone flat and sharp. Martha, one of the board members, leaned forward. Karen, this is serious. If you trespassed and damaged his property, that's beyond HOA jurisdiction. That's a legal matter, Karen stammered, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked cornered. Greg cleared his throat. After reviewing this evidence, it's clear that Mr. Turner is within his rights to maintain his yard as he sees fit, provided it follows county regulations, which it does. As for the trespassing issue, Karen, I strongly suggest you resolve this privately before it escalates further. Karen sat down hard, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. I didn't smile, but inside, I was glowing. For weeks, she tried to bully me, fine me, and humiliate me. Now the tables had turned. As the meeting ended, a few neighbors came over to pat me on the back. Dave, the retired firefighter, muttered, "Good on you, Turner." Someone had to put her in her place. Karen stormed out without saying a word, her heels clicking like gunfire on the tile floor. I watched her go, knowing this battle was over, but the war, that was done too. She wouldn't dare come near my yard again, not with the board now aware of her antics. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the moonlight cast soft shadows over my blooming vines. The roses had started to open, their petals deep crimson against the dark thorns. My garden wasn't just alive again, it was thriving, and every thorn was a reminder that I'd fought back and won. But I wasn't finished celebrating just yet. I had one more move, one final act that would ensure Karen understood she'd never hold power over me again. After the HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt different. It was quieter, calmer, as if everyone knew Karen's reign of terror had finally hit a wall. I hadn't seen her much since that night, and when I did catch glimpses of her, she avoided eye contact. No smug smirks, no condescending remarks, just silence. It was the sweetest kind of victory, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. I knew Karen well enough to know she'd try to save face. So, I decided to finish my plan and make my garden something so beautiful and so untouchable that even she couldn't spin it into a problem. Over the next 2 weeks, I poured every ounce of energy into my yard. The thorny vines had already grown into a thick, protective wall along the property line, but now I added splashes of color and charm. Wild flowers danced between the brambles, their yellows and purples glowing in the afternoon sun. I planted more roses along the front walkway, weaving them around trellises until they created a living arch that welcomed anyone who visited, except, of course, Karen. To top it off, I built a rustic wooden bench in the middle of the garden, right where my sunflowers used to stand. I could sit there in the mornings with a cup of coffee and watch the hummingbirds flit from bloom to bloom. It wasn't just a garden anymore, it was my sanctuary, rebuilt stronger and prouder than before. One morning, as I was adjusting the solar lights around the walkway, I saw Karen standing at the edge of her driveway. She looked at my yard with an expression I couldn't quite read, part anger, part defeat. I walked over, leaning casually on the fence. "Morning, Karen," I said with a friendly tone that I knew would irritate her. "How's the view from your side? Looks nice, doesn't it?" She huffed. "It's fine, just fine." Then she turned on her heel and went inside without another word. For Karen, that was as close to admitting defeat as I'd ever get. A week later, I got an email from Greg, the HOA president, Turner. It read, "I just wanted to say your yard looks incredible. A few neighbors even mentioned they're thinking of adding some native plants after seeing yours. Maybe you've started a trend." I laughed when I read it. The idea of Karen living on a street where people were inspired by my jungle must have been eating her alive. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about showing Karen that respect is earned, not enforced through HOA rule books and intimidation. By standing my ground, I'd not only protected my garden, but also shown the entire neighborhood that her bullying had limits. A few days later, I heard through the grapevine that Karen had been asked to step down from her leadership position on the HOA board. I didn't have to ask why. Between the video evidence, her failed complaints, and the way she'd alienated half the neighborhood, she dug her own grave. One evening, I invited a few of my neighbors over again for a small gathering in the backyard. We grilled steaks, drank cold beer, and laughed under the warm glow of the solar lights. People complimented my garden, asked me for tips, and told me how glad they were someone had finally stood up to Karen. Sitting there on my bench, surrounded by friends and the fragrance of blooming roses, I realized something I hadn't just won against Karen. I'd reclaimed my sense of pride and community. My yard wasn't just mine anymore, it had become a place where people felt welcome, a symbol that standing up for yourself can lead to something better. A few nights later, I saw Karen walking her dog past my house. She slowed down, glancing at the glowing arches of roses and the neat rows of thorny vines. For a second, I thought she might say something snide. Instead, she muttered, almost begrudgingly, "The garden looks nice." I smiled. "Thanks, Karen. Took a lot of work to get it this way." She nodded slightly and kept walking. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. Now, every time I sit on that bench and watch the wind ripple through the flowers, I remember the battle it took to get here. Karen thought she could poison my garden and crush my spirit. Instead, she lit a fire in me that made my yard stronger, brighter, and more unshakable than ever. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the best revenge there is. In the end, this wasn't just about a garden or an HOA dispute, it was about standing up for myself and proving that no one, not even someone like Karen, could bully me into silence. My garden is thriving now, brighter and stronger than ever, with every thorn and bloom standing as a reminder of the battle I fought and won. Karen thought she could poison my hard work, but all she really did was fuel my determination. Life has a way of testing us, and sometimes those tests come in the form of neighbors who can't mind their own business. But when you stand firm, stay smart, and refuse to let anyone trample over your efforts. You don't just protect what's yours, you inspire others to do the same. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and well-earned revenge, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and real-life justice stories. And tell me, have you ever had a run-in with an HOA Karen? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story.